that we are recording. And Suzanne has a lot of information and some wonderful resources that she's going to be sharing with us. And you are welcome to take screenshots as we go along. But I also want to let you know that the recording, once we get it topped and tailed and branded with the Collegium logo, will be available on our website in about 4 or 5 days. You can take screenshots of the things that she talks about, and we will also be including her slides on the website in about we need about 3 or 4 days to get that going. So I think that is all that I need to say by way of introduction, except to welcome Suzanne Keilson, who is a professor in the engineering department at Loyola University, Maryland. And she was one of those folks who a year ago was watching another Collegium webinar and emailed this fantastic idea. And in those days, ChatGPT was still just something, this weird, ominous shadow out there on the horizon somewhere. And here we are a year later, and schools have policies, and it's built into syllabi, and the fear might still be there, but it's taking different forms. So she is uniquely poised to talk about AI, and I love that she's taking this thing that to me still feels kind of scary and technological and viewing it through the lens of someone who has been part of Collegium and learned so much about the sacramental imagination, prophetic imagination, and is infusing that into her work. So that said, and welcomes to all, I will turn things over to Suzanne Keilson. Welcome, Suzanne.
Thank you so much, Karen. I really enjoyed doing this and putting it together. And there is so much for us to discuss. And I hope we can continue those discussions. A lot of material here. So let me start off with, however, as Karen said, giving a shout out to Collegium and acknowledging my gratitude for this opportunity that I do think helps cultivate wonder, awe, and mystery. Including this question when we came up with the title about prophets of AI doom, to think a bit more about that prophetic tradition. So I want to also start off by acknowledging my POV, point of view box, my own background, because we need to be conscious that our backgrounds, culture, shape us, what we think, see, what we think is even possible, what we believe is possible. Now, psychologists would tell us those are schemas that people have based on experiential learning that helps them do rapid processing of events, make rapid responses and decisions. And so it is natural for us to have those schemas. But the challenge for us is to continue to be open to revise our learning, our experience, to be open to the new experience, to adjust our own programming, if you will. And so the two images here are my POV, which is New York. I am a Brooklyn liberal Jewish female who loves science and math. And I'm, mid 20th century, late 20th century. And those are the lenses, if you will, that I am using. And we just have to be honest about that. So, prophets of doom. Who or what are prophets? Let's think a little bit about prophets. Prophets, we often think of as knowing the future, foretelling events that will come. But in the Hebrew prophets, they're often chastising people's behavior. They're often consoling people who are facing exile, difficult things. So there's chastising, there's consoling. They also put before the people, before us, the consequences of their actions. That is, choose life. If you choose to follow what is required, these things will happen. If you continue down this other path, these other things will happen. So why wouldn't you choose the better vision? So what I'm going to do is stop every now and then for folks to maybe put a few things in the chat and then kind of maybe bring up a few of those as time allows. So my first question for people who've taken the time to join us is, how do you think we tend to respond to prophetic chastisement, consolation, calls to repent, calls to choose a better vision? What do we tend to do? What do you think? Defensively, put it off, ignore that, bury our head, kill the prophet, skeptically, defensive, yes, not, well, yes, my words are plugging our ears. Yeah, it's, wow, not the way a psychologist would tell us to get our kids to change their behavior, isn't it? So yeah, absolutely. So let's see how that may or may not play into our modern dilemmas. Now, there are a lot of words around AI. So this is AI prophets, right? So, but what is AI? People throw around a lot of terms, a lot of letters, and I just wanted to take a few and kind of define or explain them for you. And some of you may know all this already, and obviously we can't take too much time on each of it. So the first is machine learning, ML, machine learning, DL, deep learning. And there is a long history here. So the idea of neural nets goes back to Marvin Minsky. We're talking 1960. So if folks aren't aware, it goes back a long ways. And the idea is that processing units are connected, and those connections have weights, a strength of the connection, and you can change those weights, and that is the neural net. And then the first approach or idea in training a neural net was something called supervised learning, and we still do that. And the basic idea is that there is a teacher, a supervisor, who knows the answers already. And so, for example, if you want to recognize a pattern, the machine at its outermost layer of output neurons will present the image, and then the teacher says, yes or no, that's right or that's not right. So the teacher, the supervisor, is doing the classification. And then if it's wrong, that error gets fed back into the neural net and the weights get adjusted. So roughly with some hand waving, that's the idea of supervised learning. Again, the important point for us is that there is someone, a supervisor, who knows an answer. Now, probabilistic models for learning take a little bit of a different approach. And I like to think of it in terms of breaking a cipher, or imagine I use symbols that I substitute for letters in the English language. And we know that the letter E is the most frequent letter in the English alphabet. And so whatever the symbol is that is most frequent, I might say, let's try that to be the letter E. And I'll try and break the code that way through a kind of occurrence frequency. But of course, code makers understand that. And so we go deeper into the probabilities. What's the probability of having a Q followed by a U? Very high. What's the probability of CH, digrams, and so on and so forth? So large language models take the approach, roughly speaking, of scraping billions and billions of words of text. And that becomes the training set. Now, it's not supervised, right? It's what are the probabilities of what word follows, the prior words. So if I start off with the word in, there are lots of words that could probably follow it. If I start off with the words in the, then, maybe it's in the beginning, and maybe that's more probable if it's a theology class, but maybe it's in the heat of the night, in the heat of the moment. So the longer the text string, the more those probabilities get adjusted, and it kind of reveals itself, right? So that is, in essence, large language models. What are the consequences of all of this? So one is this importance of the training set that is used. And again, this is not new. This is not a year old. I forget the year offhand, but there was a bot called Tay, T-A-Y, and it was trained on things like 4chan and maybe Twitter and so on. And that bot became so rude, biased, they took it down within a day. So what you train on makes a difference. Back in my day, every image processing algorithm was trained on Lena, which was an image of a Swedish model in a big hat. And so the joke was all of the algorithms were optimized for Lena. Again, there are consequences to this. Recently, there's a fascinating documentary called Coded Bias about face recognition. And so the training sets for the 4 largest facial recognition systems are heavily skewed to white men and do not recognize or categorize gender and race. And so Black women are often categorized as men. And we're talking about accuracy rates that drop from over 90% to 60 or 70%. So this is a real concrete scientific thing. And again, in talking with folks, I was reminded of a book, this reference, Weapons of Math Destruction, that again, the algorithms that we use reflect that history, experience, and point of view. And so who gets approved for loans? What houses get approved? When the federal government in the US did this during the Depression and ended up with so-called redlining, the people weren't necessarily consciously evil, but they said, oh, a house with a lawn has to be better than a brownstone or townhouse or attached house or with those white foam stone steps of Baltimore. And that gets embedded. Last thing about large language models, you've probably heard people talking about hallucinations, and I actually don't really like that term because it's not like it's, because I think it hides what's going on. So the idea of hallucinations is simply that because the large language models are probabilistic, they're just going to look for what's the next best probable text string. And to make the written language a little more interesting, they actually add a little bit of what we call entropy into that word choice. So they may not always choose the most frequent word, but maybe the second most frequent word. But they're not hallucinating. It's just probabilities. And so if you ask it for references, for data, it is not doing a search on a verified database. It is simply, what's the next likely, oh, I need the name of an author. So I'm going to put down Karen Eifler, and I'll put down the quantum mechanics of what, yeah, right. It's not checking a database. It's not searching. It is simply creating text strings that make sense. What is an area that is interesting, growing, exciting is this idea of multimodal models, meaning not just language, not just text, but voice, audio, video, image. And can you have one AI model that does all of that? Now, generative AI, the word generative is a wonderful word. And again, we're creating something new. So again, that's distinct from an AI or a robot that may help you search or do some other task. So generative AI would be the things where you say, produce a piece of music that has never happened before. Another term that's been used a lot lately is the idea of AI co-pilot. And that's not a bad term to think about what are probably the more advanced uses of AI in business cases, really in summarizing, outlining, and when I say coding, again, always doing the drudgery of things, right? The part of the code that is boilerplate. Can you get the AI to do that? Okay, so some of that feels good, some of that doesn't feel so good. As Karen said, we're a little nervous about it. I wanted to pause and think about, okay, historically, have there been things that have been happening like this? And so I say, what are the changes going from a scroll, the Torah scroll there in that picture, to scrolling, the young girl scrolling on her phone? So we're going from scrolls to scrolling. Well, we know that written text, damn the invention of writing, it ruined human memory, right? I can't recite Homer or the Bhagavad Gita or anything. I've got terrible memory. My ancient aunt, people would look and say, you are unintelligent. You're like a child. You can't memorize anything. I have maybe moderate handwriting. I might be the last generation that does. Probably the last generation that loved talking with research librarians. Maybe the last generation that used maps. And so, what is lost? What is gained? What do we value here? We know that there is loss here. We know that humans have critical stages of development in our neural net, if you will, that spatial skills are learned, practiced. If all you do is follow the voice on GPS, you're not learning and practicing those skills. If I were talking with someone in Australia, with an Indigenous person in Australia, an Aboriginal, they would always know the direction of north. It is, in fact, embedded in the grammar in the language. And they would again look at me as a poor, deficient child who could not orient myself spatially. So, do we still play chess? Yes. Would I argue that I still want students to have math facts memorized? Yes. If they push back, I would say having it in your brain makes it you more facile in mathematical thinking. If you're struggling to remember 7 times 8, it just drags downward all of your mathematical thinking. So my question for you is, what do you think we may gain, or what do we value of these skills? What are we losing? Maybe you've thought about this idea, maybe it's new, but what do you think? And then also the other question, so folks can, put that in the chat. The other question here is, when computers got really good at chess, we began to say, oh, that's not intelligence. That's not right, true thinking. Maybe it's thunking or spelunking or something else, but it's not thinking. The deep blue can't think. So we seem to move our mark for artificial intelligence as machines. So let's see. We can value things that are bland. That phrase, critical thinking, is such an important phrase. It's one, actually, I'll be honest, I'm not sure I know what critical thinking is, or that we've dug deep enough into what those skills really should be. So equitable access for English language learners in first gen. Yeah, we're gonna talk about that. So there are really some positive things here. Access to so many new areas. We tend towards the values of the machine. Efficiencies direct us, a conservative approach. Yes, we'll talk about that too. A sense of being able to know that is independent of our devices. That's interesting. And everyone can be an artist. So folks, what I'm seeing in a quick look at some of these comments is, seeing that it's not an either or, it's really a both and it's a rich and complicated thing. Rachel says, in addition to handwriting, what about musical instruments versus electronic? Again, an excellent point. And calligraphy for pleasure. We don't have to do these things. We can do them for pleasure. And indeed, people continue to play chess. People continue to like trivia games, right? Even though you would think, why? Just ask the internet, ask Google, why do we play Jeopardy? Great, okay. So again, more things for us to think about. Let's go on. So I wanted us, when we're thinking about these things that maybe we lose and maybe there's an opening, but that, learning the handwriting, the physicality of musical instruments, there is the body and mind combined. And so I say here, we are wetware. I didn't coin that term at all, but we're wetware. We're not software. We're not hardware. The software and hardware are intimately embodied and connected together. And this embodiment of thought and self, is in our language and our grammar. And one thing I want to add here parenthetically is most of the LLMs are English, right? English text. What are we losing in terms of cultural diversity and ways of being and understanding in the world? I mean, physically, in the physical world, when we don't have large language models of many languages. It's true you can translate sort of any thought from any language to any other, and there are lots of debates about this. But we also, anthropologists, well, I don't know if there is one online who can speak to this. I always think anthropology, cultural anthropology, is something we really need to learn. But our ways of understanding and seeing the world are rooted in language and thought. And if we just have a kind of American English text-based approach, we are poorer for it. The other thing about the embodiment here, and embodiment in language, is that, again, in the physical world, there's a kind of naive physics that develops from 6 months onward. Children, infants will look in astonishment at something that is made to hover in the air. They already have a sense that things should fall. They've already had a sense of connecting. What is self? Where do my hands end? What is outside of self? How do I manipulate scissors, handwriting, crayons, and so on? These are among the hardest things for us to get robots, embodied AI, to do, right? To navigate freely, to understand the humor embedded in language and in naive physics. This is among the hardest stuff. So that's almost a truism now in robotics. The stuff we thought was hard is easy, like chess. The stuff we thought should be easy is hard, like hand grip. So in an appreciation of this physicality, can we approach AI is a way that it would honor and elevate the physical. And I'll be honest, I was thinking here in my own religious tradition, right? Food becomes spiritual on a Friday night. You bless it, it becomes transformed. Of course, similarly for Eucharist, etc. We take a physical and something is going on. So do you see any of that as being something that we could do in AI, should be sensitive to? And I'll just look, it looked like there were a lot of good comments and things going on. Yeah, empathy. Uh, and Suzanne mentioned the Turing test. Okay, so Yeah. So there was a book I read, Would You Baptize an Extraterrestrial? I don't know if folks are familiar with that or not, but I think it came down on it depends, but possibly yes. But it sounds like people might not baptize or allow AI to engage in ritual. And then uh, Karen and other, yeah, there's just so much here. So let's take a look. This is my list. You can add to this list. I kind of skewed the list here of humanistic prophets of AI, doom, and sorrow, skewed it a little bit earlier to show you that there's a long history here, right? And again, I am a child of all of the 1970s angst and those dystopian books. Velveteen Rabbit, that's a good one. So of course, folks know Frankenstein, Pinocchio, might not always think Wizard of Oz, right? The Tin Man and the Scarecrow. Scarecrow wants to have a brain. The Tin Man wants to have a heart. In the original, Frank L. Baum, the Tin Man is a pretty grim, like grim fairy tale kind of thing, right? He keeps on getting chopped up and it keeps on getting replaced with tin. That's how he becomes the Tin Man. Golem is a mixed story of protection from the artificial life that is controlled. Again, Pinocchio and Data both want to be real boys, real people. That often seems to be a motivation in a lot of these cases. I don't know if folks have questions or comments on any of the things on this list or not. I put Pygmalion, and I think it's interesting to think about My Fair Lady, which was, said to be a G.B. Shaw's adaptation of Pygmalion originally. But so the woman is, in a sense, an artificial life, right, that is created and controlled by Professor Henry Higgins. And, whether it's, I didn't put it here, but there's the movie Her, there's a lot, and Ex Machina, there's a lot for the gender studies and feminists to kind of think through about this list as well, in thinking about what is and is not gendered about the way we think about these embodied AI. So you can, add to that list. Yeah, it is one of my favorite quotes from Blade Runner, and I think really speaks to the deep desire. And again, there are so many books, such a long tradition, but that deep desire of artificial life to become quote unquote real. At least that's our projection. Okay, so what is all of this? Can I take that in the time we have and kind of come up with a few things, 4 things here, that what are these humanistic prophets of AI doom? What are they saying? I think one thing is there's a danger of losing human purpose and human meaning. I reference Player Piano, a Kurt Vonnegut novel, where people are put into castes, class systems, hierarchies, and many people lose their meaning and purpose as they lose their economic status and stability. A little bit different from that, we can look at something like Matrix. There's no human, in this case, individual autonomy, right? Everything is controlled. There are also more obscure books, movies, etc., of machines deciding to protect people from themselves, protect humanity from itself by either launching or preventing the launch of nuclear weapons. There's also that loss or the desire for the human emotion. So the replicant in Blade Runner wants and seems to have some of that. But one of the tests, in a way, a more interesting test than the Turing test, is the test in Blade Runner for what is human and what isn't. And what's really interesting is in Philip K. Dick's original story, the way that is done and portrayed. But again, it's a focus on what is lost human emotion, and it could be both positive and negative, joy or pain, and also trust being betrayed. And I think that word trust is an important one that doesn't get mentioned enough, that it is the lubricant. Again, in America, we're all about the individual pioneer. We know that. But trust is the way we relate to each other. It is the only way our social fabric of interaction at some level can work. And with sort of deceptive AI, and there's now a thing about emergent deceptive AI, we have to worry about trust being lost or betrayed. And Ex Machina has some great things to say about that. And I think it is really telling that in so many of these stories, we lose the natural environment. Totally destroyed, totally lost. Everything is barren and gray. And so what is the connection there? It might really be, what is our fundamental human connection to nature? So how do we respond to all of this? And let's get to some pragmatics and things that folks might use. So I'm deciding we're sort of chatting, or you have to listen to me, but we're among friends. And so I get to say things like capitalism and work. We can choose life that has other purpose and meaning. And if we only focus on the productivity, as I've heard CEO types talk about how AI is going to make things more productive, which means what? It means you fire people, need less people, the people who were there work longer and harder, rather than distributing the work among as many people as possible. It squeezes it and creates a zero-sum game. And I put here universal basic income, just to put that idea out there. Besides that, possible policies need to address questions. We know this: surveillance, data. And this isn't just about government. We know this is corporate. There's surveillance capitalism is an excellent book on that topic. IP, intellectual property protections, we know this is open, new, and needs to be addressed. 2 points I want to make are that historically, we should be sensitive to the fact that the legal status of what is and is not a person has always been fluid. Whether it's women, slaves, even animals, pets, now their status is slowly shifting. There are protections that didn't exist before. Corporations are people, of course. So the idea of a legal status or protection for AI should be thought about by more than just the experts. The other thing here I want to say is that, honestly, one thing I've noticed is that the tech bros who talk about the motivations that are in sort of built in, baked in, assumed in AI are things like, dare I say, I could rule the world. Power, right? Money, power, rule the world. You know, it could be that AI is our friend, even if it's way smarter than us. Being super intelligent doesn't mean it has to squish us, right? It could have other motivations other than power. Now, there's one other really funny thing, I think, about AI and all the uproar. There's a classic problem called the paperclip problem, which says if I give AI the motivation to make paperclips, it's just going to turn the entire universe into paperclips. It will take every single resource and make it a paperclip. And I'm thinking, yeah, but you don't do infinite loops in programming. You have a stop. Or if you don't, you could. You know, that's just a question of the programmer, which means, to be clear, safety. Every engineered product, everything, your fork, your knife, your bandsaw, is a balance of safety and the risks to allow people to explore the product and the capabilities. You balance that. Every engineered product. Of course, we've got Isaac Asimov talking about the laws of robotics. Those laws of robotics don't address this question of mutuality, reciprocity, trust, and real relationship with AI that may have heightened legal status at some point. So clearly there is work to be done, including a very recent report about this sort of deceptive AI embedding in it and doing, trying to retrain the AI and it not quite working. And I can, if folks are interested, I'll tell you more about that most recent thing. So that was maybe mostly the downer, or hopefully a clear-eyed look at things. And but I think we need to think of how AI fits into a world of universal design and assistive technology, and embracing it for human flourishing. And I think this is some of the things that Karen and others have put in the chat already, that these tools can lower barriers to entry for human flourishing, just like the hearing aid in the image, and even the cochlear implant. And I do know that even things like the cochlear implant are controversial in various ways. But what can we do? We lower the barrier for everybody. That's the idea behind educational universal design. So as I tell my students, you may not be a great artist, but go ahead and sketch, sketch, sketch for engineering. But this could be, again, speaking when words fail us. Somebody mentioned English language learners couldn't the chat and so on help with that? Absolutely, right? So it is a positive stepping stone. How can we change our vision based on all the things in Collegium and the world wisdoms, so that this is not about hierarchy, power, position, inequalities, and so on, but it becomes a self within circles of those mutual relationships. Now, AI is limited in this, certainly right now, but there's a lot of places we can go. And again, the choice is ours. So that is what I want to hear from you. Where, where are your hopes? So as Susanna said, hoping it will be our better instincts. But again, I guess what I am saying is the prophetic, you get to choose. And the people of Nineveh averted their disaster. So, okay, very cool. Language learning, chatting in Italian. That's wonderful. So, yeah, the ecological impacts are tough. So I just want to kind of end with, again, there's so much more that can be said about all of these things, but I want to end with some example use cases and a link. And then in addition, I have some other resources. One use case for AI that we know of, the so-called Copilot, it's been used, it's the one that's touted the most in sort of inside higher ed and things like that. It can help do outlines, summarize lesson plans, right? It's good at very banal, broad kind of organizational things, but that really can give you a kickstart, in getting that work done, no doubt. And again, the drudgery in the boilerplate of software. Also, it occurred to me, if there are social scientists on the line, doing that coding from oral interview to text, and then from text to looking for theme related words and so on. The AI can certainly help do that kind of coding also. Two of the most interesting uses that I've seen are where a student, so an argument is put into chat and it generates the logic of the argument sort of on one side, and the students use that to analyze it, a little bit of critical thinking, and then respond to that to sharpen their own point of view. And there are lots of variations on that theme. You could have the chat create arguments for both sides, and students iterate and pick one and analyze them. I saw this done with the idea of visual study aids, but also with the idea, as Karen suggested, for metaphor and analogies. So, my example is the atom, right? We've got a visualization in our head of the atom as a little solar system. So you could have AI generate images like that, or for other abstract ideas. In what ways are those images falling short? In what ways do those visual metaphors not complete the explanation or the analogy? And the students have to analyze that. And again, they can iterate and tell the AI, make sure that you add in ... whatever it might be. There is definitely use in engineering and in the sciences. There's something called factorial experimental design. Basically, you want to tweak a lot of different parameters, and that just, again, becomes tedious, and computers are great for tedious things. And you may not be exploring all of the phase diagram for the materials, and so that it can generate design options, both for experiment and for product development. And all of these ideas have that iteration. And so the prompts, in my own simple trying, like telling Chat GPT to create a story about a dog, well, that fell flat. And then, okay, the dog's name is Sheila. Okay, and we're at a beach, and so on. And you really need to refine your prompt, as you really need to refine your search. So I am going to see if I can share this link with you. This one link, Creativity with AI, is, I thought that was the best one for folks. And here it is. So just to show you, this is Creativity with AI. It's from like the new school, and they've got everything here. If you go to the library, they have things that are visual, that are music, text, writing, and I will quickly click into this first one called Silk. And it's free. Skill level 1, you don't need to know to code, no downloading. Weave silk, draw something. Okay, and the longer I hold it there, the more it generates, and it does it symmetrically. And I go up there, and you then can decide what is and is not interesting. Now, is this improving my artistic technique? Is it fun? Sure. Could you use it in the classroom? I don't know. But again, it's just to give you that example. Again, that particular website, for folks who code, it has stuff about processing, which is a coding language to get interactive art, which this might be the beginning of an example of something like that. And you can save it and share it and so on and so forth, and keep on building. And clearly the main algorithm, as it says, it's keeping things symmetric. So let me, and Karen, you can shut me up whenever. I just want to share, there are these 2 pages with some image AI and with some music audio AI. And as we said, we're going to make that available for you. So again, there are clearly limitations here, but I would encourage you to play with that. And I would really encourage you to, let's keep this conversation going. And hopefully this was not just about, oh, the kids are going to cheat or something, because they're going to go out there they are going to need to earn money to keep body and soul together. And they will probably be using tools like this. So I really appreciate your attention. And I really am grateful for the opportunity to kind of put together my 1,000,001 thoughts on this topic, or at least some of them.
I really want to thank you, Suzanne, for taking the time in true Collegium fashion. You might have got out 1,000,001 thoughts, but you're leaving us with 1,000,001 really interesting questions. And we're not, I always take comfort in the fact that we're not confronting these questions alone. I noticed that I'm sorry, that John posed a really provocative question with 30 seconds to go. I think that we're going to be seeing a lot more workshops like this. I'm just thinking how far we've come in just a year from fear to, okay, how do we make this work, and what are the possibilities, and are there ways to really think? I mean, it's getting us talking about being human in some amazing ways that maybe we're a little bit stagnant. Again, this was recorded, and we'll brand it and put it on the Collegium website in the next 4 or 5 days. Suzanne is going to make her slides available to us, and I'll also, I think, just type up a real quick resource sheet for people who might just want to take those last couple of slides and play with them on their own. So again, thanks to everybody for taking time out from their schedule in Canada or the East Coast, West Coast, middle of the country. If you have ideas for these Collegium booster shots, eifler@collegium.org. Would love to hear from you. And again, hearty congratulations and thanks to Suzanne Keilson. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you again. I'm still reading the chats, which are fascinating. I wonder if I could collect the chat for myself. There are still folks.
Yeah, I can do that. Let's see. Is that at the top or the bottom? I should. Save chat. I just saved the chat, and I know it went onto my desktop, so I'll get that to you, okay?
Great. Yeah, I'm sorry I couldn't, get to all of them.
I think I loved how you called out folks. So I am going to click the end meeting button. Julie, I don't mean to kick you out, but I just want you to know I'm going to end the meeting and get busy on the editing. Suzanne, kudos. And you went from an idea in an email to a really provocative and evocative ongoing conversation. So thank you so much for that. Okay, bye for now.
Thanks.